Hi, I'm Ellie Waddington, a hypnobirthing teacher, positive birth advocate, and mum to two feral but adorable children. You are listening to the Bell Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. This podcast is here to empower you with the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need for a calm, positive birth experience. Together, we'll tackle the big questions, bust some myths, and share practical tips for your journey into motherhood. Plus, you'll hear inspiring real birth stories from mums who've been there, and expert guests sharing their wisdom and insights. Whether you're planning your first or adding to your tribe, I've got you covered, so let's dive in. Hey gorgeous mama, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. So today I'm recording this on what is my husband's birthday, and shout out to him because he is the most amazing, supportive, wonderful husband in the entire world, the most wonderful dad, and we are so lucky to have him. But bless him, all that man wants on his birthday is a lion, right? But I had no control over the kids this morning. They were so excited for daddy's birthday. All they wanted was to run in and give him his presents and his balloons. So, you know, if he can't have a lion on his birthday, I suppose the next best thing is being woken up at 6:30 in the morning with kids jumping on the bed and balloons being shoved in your face and presents. But yeah, he loved it, I think. Fairly sure he did. And the kids are happy and they're looking forward to loads of cake and party food later. So yeah, that's my husband's birthday. And you know, as you get older, birthdays and what you expect from them, they change. Just like Valentine's Day in a way, I suppose. We've got Valentine's Day coming up, and my husband and I have not been able to celebrate Valentine's Day together, like in a coupley way for like years, for a really long time. But this could be the year. For the first time in ages that we actually do something for Valentine's Day together. I'm not holding my breath, but we'll see. We'll see. So today's podcast interview, let's get into this. So I am joined by B from B's Birth and Boobs. Boobs and Birth? Do you know what? I can never remember which way round it is. B's Birth and Boobs? Hold on, I'm just going to look this up. It is Birth and Boobs. B's Birth and Boobs. She is an absolutely amazing woman. She is so knowledgeable, so amazing to talk to. She has been on the podcast before. We were talking about how to kind of optimize yourself for a successful breastfeeding journey. And I think this conversation we're going to have today is a really important one to have, because we talk a lot about, things that happen in birth and pregnancy affecting your breastfeeding journey, and ways that you can positively influence that. But sometimes birth happens in a different way. Sometimes things happen during birth that aren't so optimal for a breastfeeding journey, for a successful breastfeeding journey. And so you might have to take some different sort of courses of action. And breastfeeding journeys are absolutely possible in all sorts of birth scenarios. So whether you've had a C-section or a forceps or, all these different things that can happen during birth occasionally, it is absolutely possible to have an amazing breastfeeding journey after it. You just have to kind of know what the differences are, and so what you need to put in place. And so that is what we're discussing in today's episode. I really hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Hello, B. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on again. I feel very special getting to come on twice.
I know. Well, it was just such a lovely conversation last time. And so when I was thinking about guests that I wanted to do for season 3, I was like, do you know what? I want B back again, because I think there's so much more that we can talk about with this topic. So could you please start off by telling your story? So for anyone that hasn't heard the previous episode, go back and listen to that. But if this is your first time listening, B, could you please introduce yourself, tell your story, sort of what you do and how you got to be doing what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm B. I have a little bit of everything in terms of my whole life is surrounded by vaginas and boobs, pretty much, with being a hypnobirthing instructor. But I'm also a breastfeeding counsellor, a NHS infant feeding support worker as well. And it kind of started with the breastfeeding side of things. When I had my daughter 7.5 years ago, I was so overwhelmed. I was 21 years old, so I was fairly young, and I just knew nothing. I didn't do any preparation and found it so overwhelming and challenging, especially in those early few weeks, that I started to just research myself and learn a little bit about breastfeeding. And once I did, I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Everyone needs to know about this. Like cluster feeding, everyone needs to know about this. And I was trying to pass on all of this information to everyone else because I loved helping them. And that led on to me doing a peer support course with my local group when she was about 6 months old. And that then in turn, I started to do a breastfeeding counsellor course when she was about 1.5, 2. And then that led on to me finally finding a job in the NHS. They are very difficult to find, these infant feeding support worker roles, but I did find one and been in it for the last 4 years and absolutely love doing what I do, supporting everyone with infant feeding. It's something that I feel so passionately about, just passing on that information, the support. I'm not here to push people to do things that they don't want to do. I'm not here to push breastfeeding. I have a very firm thought of, if someone wants to breastfeed, they deserve to get the information and support to be able to do so. Yeah, it's definitely a very rewarding thing, and it's something that I do a lot. It's big passion of mine. That's where like all of this started, and then obviously I became a hypnobirthing instructor as well. And it's amazing because obviously the two things, birth and breastfeeding, they tie it in massively together. And I think a lot of people forget about that as well, that actually the way that things go in your birth, it's not just a separate entity of, right, we have birth, okay, then it's separate thing, now we've got breastfeeding. The way that birth pans out can have an impact on breastfeeding. It's why, like, so many times if I'm speaking to someone and they're going, oh, breastfeeding is difficult, they're explaining what's happening, and I'll go, can you just tell me about your birth? Because that will tell me a hell of a lot of what's actually going on here. That gives me a lot of information.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And this for me, this reminds me so much of, obviously we're talking about people, but I've worked with farm animals for a lot of my life. And wherever we've had a sheep or a cow that's had a difficult birth, they really struggle with bonding with their calf or their lamb. Sometimes we have to hold them to allow them to let their young, have those first couple of feeds. And we're no different. We are animals. I know some people don't like to hear it, but we are animals. And
Absolutely.
we have those same sorts of troubles and those same struggles to work through. So yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think I'm going to put your tagline as "I am surrounded by vaginas and boobs." That's my favorite thing I think you've ever said. So that is now
It's
how you're
literally
going to be
my
known.
whole life. It's 24/7.
I love that. So that kind of brings us on to what our topic is today, which is basically breastfeeding after having had, a cesarean or interventions or something difficult with your birth, because we often talk about how birth has to go kind of a certain way to optimize breastfeeding, and that's true. But that doesn't mean that if you have cesarean or if you have interventions that breastfeeding can't work. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think that is such a common, question that I have when talking to someone antenatally. They'll be saying, oh, I need to have a cesarean due to whatever reason. Um, does that mean that I'm going to struggle with breastfeeding? Or the most common one is that, is my milk supply going to be delayed in coming in? It's a really common worry for people. And really, when it comes to like delayed milk production, there isn't actually that much evidence that it does delay milk production coming through. There's a small bit of evidence that it might delay it by up to 12 hours. I mean, that's not a huge amount of time when we know that milk coming in, you know, can be anywhere from day 2 and day 6. That's a really big span of things. So actually, we don't know when it would have come in anyway. And say milk coming in, I like to call about it milk transitioning rather than coming in, because it, you have milk before then. But really, it shouldn't have a big delay in milk production, because what triggers the change in your milk production and the hormones shifting is the removal of the placenta. And we're still removing the placenta with a cesarean. There could be a possibility that maybe if it's an unplanned cesarean and things are rushing around all over the place, there could possibly be a small amount of placenta left inside, but that's also a risk with vaginal birth. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but a lot of people do worry that, especially with a cesarean, that means breastfeeding is not going to go well or you're going to struggle. And it's not the case at all. I've seen a lot of people that have had cesareans that breastfeeding is going absolutely perfectly. But I also think it's really important to prepare for how to breastfeed after a cesarean, because we know that the cesarean rates are so high at the moment. There's no point in sort of saying, okay, we're going to have this amazing experience and we're going to have this birth and this is how it's going to go. And I'm going to breastfeed like this as soon as the baby's born. What if that doesn't happen? There are absolutely still things that you can have control over with a cesarean. Obviously, in hypnobirthing, we talk about this a lot in terms of you can have immediate skin to skin, you can have that optimal cord clamping and everything. Just because baby has been born by C-section doesn't mean they get taken away and, you know, get wrapped up like a burrito and then get passed to you. You can still get that skin to skin. And it doesn't, obviously, we ideally want it to be as soon after birth as possible. But if for whatever reason, you know, you are not well as soon as the cesarean's happened, a lot of women do feel quite sick and dizzy and faint after a cesarean. So they hold the baby for a couple of minutes and then they go, actually, I'm feeling quite shaky. I can't hold them in skin to skin anymore. And then maybe the partner or the birth partner, whoever that is, will have some skin to skin. That doesn't mean that you've lost that. Just restart that skin to skin at a later time when you do fill up for it. And when you do get in skin to skin, just stay there for a really long time. Hours, literally hours. I think a lot of people get surprised when I say do some skin to skin. They go, yeah, I'm doing it for like 10 minutes before a feed. I'm like, no. Stay there for hours. Sit there with your baby in skin to skin. That is what will really help with breastfeeding. Skin to skin is like magic. It's such an amazing tool that we forget about, but it doesn't mean that if you've not had that skin to skin at birth, that's it. We've got to, we can like throw our hands in the air and just admit defeat. Once you're in recovery, get that skin to skin then. It's not too late to do it at any point in time.
Yeah, so can we take a few steps backwards? We were talking a minute ago about transition milk, your milk coming in. So for anyone that's listening that doesn't understand what that process is, can you just explain what you mean and what is being produced when you have your baby, and
Mhm.
then what the transition milk process is?
Absolutely. Yeah, I seem to go off very quickly on big tangents because my brain is just like going, ah. So stop me if I go too far. Absolutely. So when you are pregnant, you start to produce your first milk, which is called colostrum. This happens from, it can be from around 16 weeks of pregnancy. So when people say in the early days, I've not got any milk, you will absolutely have colostrum. It is being produced. It's normally quite sticky. It can be a yellow color sometimes, but it also can come in white color. But it's, the important thing is it's very small quantities, and that is because it is just packed full of so much nutrients. Babies do not need much of this colostrum in the early few days because one, their tummies are really tiny. But also it's just perfectly tailored. It's got everything that they need. It's very high in sugar, so it'll give them like a good boost of sugar. Well, obviously natural sugars, because they need to like be awake and alert, especially if baby has like low blood glucose levels. Why can't I talk? And it's got so many antibodies in, because a newborn baby has, obviously, they've just got a very baseline for fighting off infections. They're really vulnerable. So this is giving their immune system an amazing boost in those few days, and that will keep them going for life. You know, just because the colostrum finishes doesn't mean that the benefits have stopped of all those antibodies. But that is produced for baby in the first sort of 2 to 5 days of life. Like I said, the milk transitioning can happen between day 2 and 4. And as I mentioned, it's the removal of the placenta that switches the hormones up and starts the process of actually making milk. I'm trying not to say the sciencey words because it just becomes a bit too complicated, or like lactogenesis and everything. So I'm not going into that, but it starts the process in your body of actually making the milk. So everyone will their milk will come in at a certain time, regardless of whether they're breastfeeding or not, because of the removal of the placenta. So it will happen for everybody, regardless of how you're feeding them. Um, but like I said, it can happen between day 2 and day 6. Most commonly, I tend to find it happens on day 4. Um, you start to sort of feel the breasts filling, they feel a bit heavier, a bit firmer. And you might, if you were to like squeeze your breast or try and hand express, rather than it being like a little sort of bead that comes onto the end of your nipple with the colostrum being small quantities, you might find it starts to flow a little bit more. So it starts to come in larger quantities at that point in time. And that doesn't mean that, you know, the colostrum wasn't enough. Like I said, the composition is really, really different. So that's why when the milk transitions, the baby needs larger quantities just because that composition of breast milk is different to colostrum. If hopefully that is making sense.
Yeah, so what I'm kind of hearing you say is that the colostrum that you produce initially, this is something kind of kickstarts the baby. It's just a really concentrated shot. I kind of describe it almost like a stock cube. Like
Yeah.
it's like all the goodness is kind of concentrated down into this really
Mm.
thick kind of sticky liquid, and that's all they need for the first few days. And then it slowly starts to change. And it's not like a sudden turning on a tap. It just very kind of gradually happens over several
Yeah.
days.
Yeah. And some people, they'll get like they wake up in the morning and go, oh my gosh, my breasts are suddenly huge. But we also get that transitional period, that transitional milk, where they start to feel them maybe firming up. If they'd have noticed, like the day before, they might have felt that actually their breasts were a little bit firmer beforehand. And yeah, it doesn't just go from colostrum 1 second, it's colostrum, the next second, it's mature milk. It goes from colostrum, transitional milk, slowly into mature milk. So some people, if they're like expressing during that time, they might notice that because their colostrum was like really yellow in color, they slowly start to get more volume like mature milk, but the color is still really, really yellow. And then over the next couple of days, it changes and changes and then goes to white. So they can actually see the process of that change in how the milk changes over that period.
Yeah. And I can remember distinctly with both of mine, on that kind of day 3, day 4, I was incredibly emotional for
Oh yeah,
no particular reason. And like nothing had happened. I would just start getting really kind of emotional and teary just for no apparent reason. And that's quite normal.
100%. And it's because the hormone switch, it literally does a complete 180, the hormone switch. And that means that it's apparently from research, it is the biggest hormonal change and the quickest hormonal change that anyone will experience in their entire lives. So that is why on that day you tend to be tearful, crying, very emotional because of that massive hormonal shift. And you've just got to take it kind of steady at that point and be kind to yourself in those moments, and actually just knowing that that is normal and to be expected can really help, because if you're in that moment and you're just crying constantly and you don't know why, it can feel again so much harder to actually keep going and think, oh god, there's something wrong with me. But if you know that this is normal, don't worry, it will pass, you can
Yeah, and
kind
also for the
of
people around you to know that's normal as
mm,
well, because it can be worrying for birth partners because they're navigating this new stage of life as well. If on day 3 they think, oh yeah, this is all fine, and then suddenly you start crying your eyes out for no apparent reason, they need to know that that's also a normal
yeah.
part of the process.
Yeah, definitely. It's then they can sort of just support you and just be there and know that actually there's nothing wrong. We don't need to panic. I'm just going to sit. I'm going to bring you lots of cups of tea, lots of chocolate. I'm going to give you loads of cuddles and tell you that you're doing amazing, and it'll be fine. And like
Yeah.
reminding her of it as well, because in that moment she'll probably just be crying and thinking, "Oh, it's all terrible. You'd be so emotional." You need your partner or your birth partner, someone close to you, coming in and going, don't forget this is normal. You know, we're on day 3, we're on day 4. It's normal to be emotional. It's all the hormones and stuff. You know, there's nothing wrong with you or baby. We're all okay. This is just to be expected. Don't panic. That little
Yeah,
reminder.
and so why I kind of really wanted to focus on this kind of transitional phase was because still, like I'm still seeing advice and hearing questions from women. They hear the words, milk comes in, and they assume that they don't have anything to feed baby for those first few days, and that they need to have formula ready to go. And when you think about it logically, like why on earth would nature create a system where you have nothing to feed your newborn for 3 days? But it's just the language that we tend to use in maternity, which is really unhelpful.
Yeah, it's a very problematic phrase, which is why I prefer calling it mature milk. So when I'm speaking to someone, say, "Has your mature milk come through yet? Has your mature milk started to transition?" Rather than just calling it milk comes in, because yeah, it does just create that sense of, well, I must not have anything until that point. And I've had many people ask me about that as well. Loads of people say, well, I've been told the milk comes in at day 3. So what happens before then? What on earth do I feed my baby? Should I get a formula for those first few days? And I just, yeah, it it shocks me still sometimes. And I can't believe that we are not educating just people in general in life, not just in pregnancy, but in life, that that's not something that happens.
Well, I mean, this kind of right, we're going off on a tangent here, but
Oh,
we know that go back sort of 200 years, you would just see your family members breastfeeding. Like it was just such a normal part of everyday life. You give birth and then they start breastfeeding, and we just don't tend to see that anymore. Like it's so much of it is hidden away and it's so medicalized, birth and breastfeeding, and so we just don't have that knowledge. We just don't grow up with it.
no.
Um, yeah, which is it's a major part of it.
Yeah. And I think we're very much a bottle feeding culture. And there's nothing wrong with bottle feeding at all. I support everyone with their feeding choices. But it does mean that people see bottle feeding much more. And again, I've had women in pregnancy come to me going, I didn't even realize there was another choice other than bottle feeding. I'm like, wow, have we really become that society where people never see breastfeeding, that they don't even realize that breastfeeding is something that you can do? I was like, wow.
Yeah, and this is really kind of ingrained in us from such a young age. I remember a few months ago, when I was Christmas shopping for my daughter, and I was thinking, I'll get her some nice dolls. She's old enough to have dolls now,
And
and
they
every
all have
single one came
bottles
with a
in them.
bottle. I was like,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. I'm just gonna get her like a baby like sling so she can put a doll in the sling, because that's much more natural and what she's grown up with. And again, I'm not kind of against bottle feeding, but I think it's sad that that's kind of seen as the normal standard,
Yeah.
and I don't necessarily think that should be the case.
Yeah. What I do find mad is that sometimes those babies, they come with like a baby bottle, but that's filled with like pretend orange juice. What on earth? Why are we giving these newborn babies orange juice in a bottle?
Yeah, that's even worse. That's madness, absolute madness. But
Yes.
we've gone off on a complete tangent here.
Absolutely. That was bound to happen though.
Yeah, yeah, that's going to happen. So what we're actually talking about is obviously preparing to breastfeed after interventions such as C-section and other interventions which can impact that journey. So let's talk a little bit about how would initiating breastfeeding after a C-section be different from initiating breastfeeding after a vaginal birth?
I think the main thing that most people would find is a difference is simply the fact that because they've had a cesarean, they're going to have a scar on their tummy and be painful. That's a big wound that is trying to heal. So it might be that finding a position that's comfortable for her and for the baby is maybe a little bit more challenging. It might be a case of trying to fiddle around, try a few different positions, because it isn't just as simple as, okay, yeah, we pop baby there. It might be that, oh no, that position hurts because they're lying on my scar, so I can't do that one, so we need to try something else. A lot of people like to put a cushion over their cesarean scar, just to then have it sort of protected a little bit. But what I will say is people need to be really cautious with cushions, and especially like breastfeeding pillows, because a lot of women use it to just place baby on. And then what happens is that baby's really far away from mum's body, which means that then we're not able to get a good attachment to the breast and a deep attachment to the breast. So people need to use the cushion as a protective factor for their cesarean scar, but not to rest the baby onto. And it's kind of, it might be a case of we still do that cradle position. We might try laid back a little bit. Sometimes that can help because we're not putting as much pressure baby onto the womb. We can sort of put baby to the side and lean back a little bit. So baby's not like sitting directly on the scar. It could be that the rugby ball position works a little bit better. But I think that's probably, especially in the first few days, because that tends to be when the scar is, that most painful because it's trying to repair itself and it's going to be bruised and stuff as well around the area. So I think in those first few days, women might find that just finding a comfortable position is different to a vaginal birth.
Yeah, because it's a major surgery and
Yeah.
it's the only major surgery where you are then expected to be up and
Mhm.
about and caring for an actual
Yeah.
child a few hours later.
Oh, don't. It makes me really cross, actually. Like, literally, people that have had any other form of surgery, they're like, okay, we need to rest. We need to rest. Yes, we might need to, get you up and moving just to prevent some blood clots and stuff. But the most of the time, we need to rest. Okay, not with a C-section. Come on, up you get. Right now, you need to get out of hospital and you need to do everything for yourself. No, you need to be moving all the time. Get up, go for walks. And I just find it absolutely mental that we're expected to do all of that. When my daughter was about 18 months, I had to have my gallbladder removed. And this was really simple keyhole surgery, like literally the tiniest little cuts and in a few places. And I was in and out, of the surgery within half an hour. I was awake and then I was home that afternoon. It was nice and simple. But I really struggled with finding that comfortable position after getting home and feeding her. I was like, oh my gosh, it really hurts. And then trying to lie down and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, imagine doing this with a newborn. This is really tricky. And I couldn't even walk more than about a minute, doing really slow walking for a good week. And I just couldn't believe that this is what is expected of, women that have just had a C-section. But
And this is
obviously,
actually a
all the different
relatively
pieces
kind of
of that.
recent development, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
my husband was born by C-section in the late 80s. And my mother-in-law, it was a fairly like straightforward C-section. Mother and baby were both healthy and recovering, but they were still in hospital for 10 days
Yeah.
recovering from that. And they had the support, they were being looked after because it's a major surgery and that was the standard.
Mm.
So that's only really recently that they've decided, actually, do you know what? You can just crack on with it.
Yeah.
We've cut through your entire abdomen, but no, you can just
Mhm.
get on with it.
Yeah. Both of our local hospitals now have an enhanced C-section recovery and discharge, which basically means from the moment that you are admitted into hospital, they are aiming to get you out within 24 hours of that admission. So even if you end up having the C-section at 7 o'clock at night, they will still aim to get you out in the morning within 24 hours of you actually being admitted to hospital.
That's not what I thought you were going to say when you said enhanced.
No, the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's not what I thought you were going to say. Wow, that's horrendous. That's
Yeah. And that's
awful.
something they've developed over the next few years and they think it's amazing. They're like, yeah, let's get these enhanced recoveries for C-section. And it's only for planned C-sections, not for unplanned. But yeah, they're trying to get them discharged as quick as they possibly can.
But you're not recovering.
I know.
Like, yeah, that's not an enhanced
No.
recovery. That's mad. That's just
Yeah.
like kicking. That's no, that's okay. That's crazy. Let's move on from that because we're going to get angry. So what I think would be really great is you mentioned some different kind of positions, some feeding positions. Could you talk through some of those positions for anyone that's listening and is sort of thinking, what on earth is rugby ball? What on earth is laid back? Because we do all kind of think breastfeeding is just the cradle hold. That's kind of the
Yes.
standard that we see. And I remember myself when I was learning different positions, I was like, I had no idea that you could hold your baby like in all these different crazy positions.
Yeah.
So could you just talk through some of them and how you think learning these kind of different positions might benefit someone with a scar?
Yeah. So the rugby ball position is kind of imagining that, or some people call it the football position, obviously, if they're American. They are holding the baby underneath their armpit. So the baby is coming from the side of their ribs. So if baby's coming onto the right breast, for example, imagining their head is at the breast, their body is going around the right side of your body, and their feet are coming sort of around your back a little bit. And this can be good for a C-section because obviously they're not anywhere, their body isn't anywhere near the C-section scar. So they're not putting any pressure on it at all. I also find that this position can work really well for if mums are quite large chested, because sometimes if they do have large breasts, they're struggling to get in that cradle position because they feel like, well, they need to lift the breast up, but they need to lift baby up. And then they're like, okay, now I'm holding breast and baby. Whereas with the rugby position, you can just let your breast hang how it does and bring baby from underneath your breast. And it can help to get that position. You definitely would need some form of pillows or cushions with this position because it just helps to keep baby lifted up a little bit. Always, you can use your elbow to tuck in baby's bottom so that you're using like your bicep to actually hold the weight of baby rather than just your hand. You need to actually be using your muscles, but using some pillows to just lift baby up can be really, really helpful.
I
This,
actually, sorry to interrupt. I actually found with me, not this isn't going to apply to everyone, but actually the arm of my sofa was
yeah,
exactly where I needed it to be for the rugby ball hold. And I know everyone's going to have a sofa
yeah,
with an arm in exactly that right position, but it can work.
yeah.
Sorry,
It's just fine.
carry
I
on.
think it's finding like things in your house that, we don't have to buy a specific breastfeeding cushion. It can be just things that you've already got in the house. Try and make it work like that. I do find the rugby ball position can be a little bit tricky if you've got like a really long baby, or as baby gets a little bit bigger, because it can mean that obviously their legs are going behind your back. So it can mean that like you can't sort of sit back and relax into the feed if they're super, super long, just because you'll end up sitting on their feet. But it can be a really helpful one. I think it's really helpful to try out a couple of positions, even if you're feeding in that cradle position. You think, yeah, this is brilliant. I like this one. Trying out a couple of different ones because you might find that one works even better and that one's even more comfortable rather than just sticking with the one position. Then you've got a few to kind of like play with. The laid back position, the other one I mentioned, absolute favorite of mine. It is fantastic. It's very simple in terms of all that it means is you're reclining a little bit. So rather than you sat bolt upright, you're just, maybe if you're in the bed, you have a couple of cushions behind your back and you just shuffle your bottom forward and you're reclining yourself. You're not fully lying down on your back, you're at an angle. And then you put baby near to the breast because baby can actually self attach in this position. So we want to put them under the breast. So they'll use their feet to kind of like push themselves up a little bit. And then they'll bob their head on the breast a few times trying to find it. This can look really worrying and go, oh, they're not able to do it. I need to help. Just leave them to it in this position and they will eventually get on. This can be really helpful to get a deep attachment to the breast because gravity helps to push a little bit more breast tissue into their mouth. But it is also helpful in terms of, like I said, you don't have to have baby at a particular angle. You don't have to have them in that cradle position. You can have their feet in any direction you want where it's comfortable for you. So you have the control over, actually, I don't want their legs in this position because that's going to hurt my scar. So if I just shuffle their feet this way, you're enabling them to not put any pressure on that scar again. But it's a lovely position to like skin to skin as well, get that nice eye contact. A lot of the time, it means that you're only supporting them with one arm. So you've got a hand free, which is always a bonus when it comes to having a baby and being able to eat with the other hand or do something with the other hand. But I love that position as well. It's a really helpful one to just, if you're, if your baby's not latching on or something, you can just get in skin to skin and let them just explore the breast and latch on themselves.
Yeah, I do that in the bath. So my little girl is still boobing. She's almost 3. And sometimes she just hops in the bath with me and I'll just be laying down and she'll just be on top of me, on the boob. And yeah, they absolutely love that.
I love
Yeah.
that. Never get a bath in
Um,
peace though, do you?
No, that's yeah, that's one of my big goals for this year is
Yeah.
before the end of the year I'd like a bath by myself.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
That's the dream. Do
Yeah,
you know?
it is.
Do you know what else is my dream? Right, my husband was asking me, do I want anything like special for my birthday this year? And I said, oh, I want a night away, and he was like, yeah, that sounds great. We could go this place or that place. I was like, no, sorry, I want a night away by myself. Like
Yes.
I want to go and lock myself in a room by myself and have nobody talk to me or touch me like for
Mm.
24 hours. That's my present, please.
Oh
That's
my
yeah,
God,
that's what
doesn't
I
that
would
sound
like.
incredible? After like parenting for so many years and being touched out so much, just want to be by myself for a little
Yeah,
bit.
like even if it's just the Premier Inn down the
Yeah,
road, like
that sounds
like it doesn't
brilliant.
have to be special.
That sounds absolutely glorious.
Yeah, yeah.
Premier Inn sounds wonderful.
So, my next thing that kind of want to talk to you about a little bit is kind of the help that you could get. So, obviously, we're
Mm.
kind of talking about here. We've been talking about kind of what the mums can do themselves to help themselves with kind of moving forward with breastfeeding. But let's assume that a lot of these mums they're not going to be completely by themselves. They're going to have their partners. They might have a postpartum doula. They might have their mums or whoever helping them. What kind of help should they be requesting and expecting from the people around them?
I think one of the main ones is someone passing baby to them whenever baby does need a feed. Because when you're trying to lift yourself up, get into a position, you're recovering from major surgery, and then you need to lift your baby up, that is going to be causing a lot of extra tension in your C-section. It'd be so much easier if someone can just get a baby for you, pass them to you, and then you can just focus on actually latching them onto the breast and feeding them. It's such a simple thing, but it makes a massive difference, especially to someone's C-section recovery as well. And as with any sort of breastfeeding journey, this you know relates to not just after a C-section, but any birth. Whoever is around the mum to support her in terms of making sure she's fed, making sure she's got a drink, making sure that she's getting sleep and stuff. Just someone else to look after the mum. And so her only focus is actually looking after that baby and feeding that baby. She does not have the mental capacity or the physical capacity, especially if she's had a C section, to try and look after herself on top of things. What she will do is prioritize baby. That is her main priority, and she'll neglect herself. She'll forget to eat. She'll forget to have a drink. She'll forget to sleep. She will just neglect herself completely. So, if whoever is around can just really focus on looking after her, that can make a huge difference with how breastfeeding can pan out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this, although we are talking about kind of C-sections here, I think this goes for all births. It's having someone to take that mental burden off with regards to the rest of the house, like you not having to worry about the laundry or getting the older kids to school, walking the dog. If someone else is dealing with that, then that's such a weight off your mind. It makes such a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah, definitely. It does make a big difference to someone being able to carry on breastfeeding as well, because it's what someone will do is if they're struggling to look after themselves and doing all these other things on top of breastfeeding, they'll probably think, okay, well, I can't stop all of those things, but what I can do is stop breastfeeding and then get some help with that. Whereas actually, we want to be doing it the other way around. We want someone to be helping with all the other stuff, and your main focus is just being able to breastfeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I had another question in my head there and it's just completely gone out the window. So what sort of is there any additional support out there available for mums that have had a C-section and want to breastfeed? Like is there kind of different support available there?
Not in particular, I don't think. I think it may be trust dependent, but it may be a case of having to ask for it, unfortunately, because it's seen as, you know, so normal. It happens so frequently that I think a lot of people, specifically in the NHS, will kind of be like, okay, it's a C-section, that's fine. It won't be seen as this needing any further support. Um, I sometimes see, depending on the midwife, that after a C-section, they might come out a little bit more frequently to see them. It'll probably be mostly the fact that they'll go, oh, you've had a C-section, so we want to, keep checking your scar, make sure that it's healing nicely, make sure that it's not getting infected, rather than the fact that, oh, you've had a C-section and you're breastfeeding, you might need a little bit more support, which is really upsetting. You just saying that question, it's kind of made me go, oh my God, there isn't anything really in particular that is kind of designed to kind of support women that have had a C-section and are breastfeeding. There's nothing really there. It may be a case of just asking for the support. I think it's really helpful to talk to other mums that have had a C-section and have breastfed, find out their experiences. There are in various different places lots of support groups, lots of volunteer run support groups. And obviously, it can be really difficult to attend these after a C-section. A lot of the time it'll be recommended, oh, go to this breastfeeding support group, but you're recovering from surgery. So you're probably going to struggle to go to these groups. And then, for example, your partner only has 2 weeks of paternity leave. Finally, you're 2 weeks after birth and you go, okay, maybe I do feel well enough to actually go, but I can't drive myself. So I can't get there. So I can't attend this group. By the time that they're feeling able to and then being signed off to be able to drive afterwards, they're 6 weeks postpartum and have probably figured everything out themselves or have stopped. So it's just sort of, it makes it even harder to access that support. I always recommend to people to go to their local breastfeeding support group while pregnant, because you can at least know what's there, how to get there, have a conversation with people as well. Some volunteers also do home visits and stuff as well. So if you have had a C-section and you are struggling to get to that support group, because that is completely understandable, message them and ask if someone can do a visit to you, because that is absolutely something that should be accommodated. You shouldn't be feeling like you have to go to a group to access support, especially if you've just had a C-section.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And obviously, the people that know they are going to have a planned C-section, they
Mm,
can prepare for it. But it's also a good idea, even if you're not planning a C-section, to kind of look into this a little bit anyway, because emergency C-sections can happen. And if you haven't put those preparations in place, then you don't know what you don't know.
yeah. It's just the same as birth, isn't it? We prepare for a C-section, even if you're planning to have a home birth. Always
Yeah.
plan for a C-section, because the C-section rates are very high at the moment. So it only makes sense to do the same with breastfeeding. We don't have to do, in depth. It's just maybe it is considering the fact that, oh, maybe the positions might be a little bit more challenging. With an unplanned cesarean, one of the possible things that could impact milk supply, rather than it being delayed, is if you have a large blood loss, because milk is made from your blood. So if you have a very large blood loss, and this is the same with vaginal, you could have a very large blood loss with that, but it can mean that your milk supply is naturally lower. So it may be a case of, being mindful of that, knowing that it can have an impact. And if you do have a very large blood loss, asking for iron tablets, maybe asking for a transfusion, because a lot of the time they won't want to do that unless it's like really, really necessary. And they go, oh no, we definitely need to. It might be a case of actually you request that, because then you can help with your milk supply so that it's not too low. But that is being mindful that having a big loss, which is more common with an emergency C-section than a planned one, just because there might be other complications happening that can cause that. Things are a lot less risky in a planned situation. But it's just knowing that and understanding that that is something that could possibly happen, and how you can sort of deal with that. It's knowing about those possibilities, knowing about the positions that you could try that you might be able to do with you being uncomfortable and painful with the C-section scar.
Yeah. Okay. Um, And feeling kind of positive and happy with your birth experience, we know that has a direct kind of knock-on effect to whether or not you choose to breastfeed, but also whether you succeed in inverted commas with breastfeeding. I don't
Mhm.
believe in succeeding or failing,
Yeah,
but you know what I mean.
completely.
Um, And so we've heard a lot in recent years about calm C-sections or gentle C-sections. Could you talk to us a little bit about some of the elements of that and how that can actually make a more positive breastfeeding journey for you?
Yeah, 100%. Wondering the fact simply that it's a calm environment, baby is being born gently. It kind of gives the baby the time to actually adjust to the world before just being kind of pulled out and go, oh my God, what's happened? It can be a more traumatic experience, which can then stop them from actually latching to the breast from the beginning. Another thing is that with a gentle C-section, the aim is to try and push the muscles and push the uterus from the outside to try and like manually squeeze baby through um, the cut that they've made. And that can sometimes help to mimic baby coming through the birth canal, squeezing them through. And this can actually bring up some mucus from their chest. And we do tend to find that babies that are born by C-section, we don't have lots of research about this, but anecdotally, they tend to be more mucousy, which can again mean that they struggle to actually feed at the breast effectively because they're constantly trying to bring up this mucus. So it can sometimes help to bring up a little bit of that mucus so they feed a little bit more effectively. Um, it's kind of again with any form of C-section going back a little bit with emergency, but it's trying to talk to your team to reduce the possibility of using instruments in the C-section, because a lot of people don't realize that sometimes they do use like forceps during the C-section. It's not as common at the moment, but forceps absolutely can cause some form of tension in the baby's jaw. And again, this is for if they're having a vaginal birth with forceps, they can get a lot of tension, which can then mean that they're in a bit more pain and struggle to feed as well. I always recommend anyone that has had instrumental birth or forceps or anything to go and take the baby to like a cranial osteopath or chiropractor or something to try and release that tension. So that is maybe something to be mindful of with a C-section as well, is that they might actually have a little bit of tension in their face and in their jaw. But having it done, having that C-section gently, again, it might be that you can have the lights a little bit dimmer. That obviously depends on the theatre. Some theatres, it's either a light is on or off, and you can't have a light off in theatre. That would be very, very unsafe. But it might be that you're able to get that immediate skin to skin because they can see that baby's been born nice and calmly. They've done it nice and gently, and they can see, well, baby is definitely breathing. They've got a good tone. We can see that they're well and they're healthy. So we can have that straight away skin to skin as well. It's also a lot better for mum in terms of she's probably going to be a bit calmer as well. And with those hormones, if she's calmer, she's going to be releasing that lovely oxytocin, which is what we need to initiate breastfeeding. And for that milk to actually release as well, that oxytocin. So having all that together does definitely help with getting it breastfeeding initiated as well. So it definitely helps.
Yeah, amazing. And you touched a little bit there. We've been focusing quite heavily on C-section because that's kind of like that's the major intervention that I
Yeah,
think is going to disrupt the breastfeeding process. But there are also elements of interventions with vaginal birth that could also interrupt that. So can we talk a little bit about that? You touched on forceps. Are there any other interventions, any other elements that could kind of disrupt that breastfeeding process?
definitely. I mean, pain relief is a big one in terms of epidural for a main one because that can actually disrupt babies' ability to coordinate all of their body together. And that can actually be the case. It's not just immediately after birth. This can be the case for up to 2 weeks. A lot of people don't realize that it's a really, really long time for them to get that coordination back. So it's being mindful possibly. And again, this isn't sort of aiming to shame anybody in like, you should never get an epidural. And if you do, this is a terrible thing. It's going to impact it awfully. It's just about knowing that, okay, I've had an epidural because I've really, really needed one. But now this is something that might possibly come up, and it's just maybe being patient with you two together and taking a bit more time when you go to latch baby on to allow them the time to learn and figure out that coordination. Like I mentioned, forceps that can absolutely cause some tension in the jaw. Ventouse, not so much in terms of that tension in the jaw because it's not going around their kind of that lower part of their head, but it's suctioning onto the top of their head. Anything like that, it can cause a bit of pain. If they've got a suction cup on their head, it can sometimes be uncomfortable. It might also mean that instrumental birth babies struggle to be held in a particular way because they've got a headache on one side. We don't realize that actually babies are humans. They experience pain and headaches the same as us as adults. It could just be the fact that baby has got a bit of a headache and a bit of a sore head and needs some time to sleep and recover and feel well, and probably a lot of skin to skin because that's going to help them to feel better, and just giving them a little bit of time with that. um yeah, it's a lot of things can impact it, but sometimes it's just about knowing it and going, okay, that's all right. We just need a little bit more time to figure this out together, rather than panicking and going, it's not working, we need to give formula. It's just saying, it's okay. I had a forceps birth, so baby might be a little bit uncomfortable. Baby might not be alert and awake very much because I've had, pain relief. Maybe I had pethidine not long before baby was born, so of course they're going to be a little bit sleepy. That's okay. We'll just get some skin to skin and we'll give us a bit more time. If we really desperately need to feed baby, we can work on hand expressing some colostrum to give baby just a small amount. They don't need large volumes, but we can get that process going just to keep them going for a little bit while they're trying to recover. Because they've also been through a hell of an ordeal with birth, regardless of how the birth has gone. They've been through it all as well. They need that time to recover too.
Yeah, and I think kind of people forget this. Like your baby has literally like if they've been born vaginally, they've been squeezed through a
Yeah,
vagina. Like that's quite a thing, you know?
yeah,
So they need some patience, they need some time. And that's okay.
yeah, definitely. And if mum has had syntocin on for any reason, so that is this synthetic oxytocin, and that's not just used in an induction, it can be used to augment the birth as well, to quote unquote speed it up. Um, and if mum is given that, that can commonly cause babies' birth weight to actually be higher than what it's meant to be. So because they end up with additional fluid in their body. So it can mean that baby comes out being heavier, and then within 24 hours they lose a lot of their fluid. And then when the midwives come to check on day 5, because a baby will lose up to about 10% of their birth weight, that is completely normal, completely expected. They may look like they've lost a lot more. It may look like they've lost 12%, and we go into this massive panic of, oh my goodness, this baby's lost loads of weight. And actually it could be that it's just they've lost that fluid. There is some studies around it, and at the end of the study the recommendation was any baby that the mum has had IV fluids during labour, so it doesn't have to be just syntocin, it could be they've had paracetamol intravenously, the baby should be weighed again after 24 hours and use both of those as a weight. So they don't just focus on the birth weight or focus on the 24-hour one. At day 5, they'll use both of those weights to go, okay, well, using the initial birth weight, we've lost 10%, but using the day, at 24 hours, we've only lost 6%. So I think let's give it an extra couple of days. And actually, if we come back in a couple of days and the weight is still sort of at that sort of higher end percentage, maybe it is to do with feeding. But otherwise, people are then they're panicking and going, well, we need to put you on a feeding plan and we need to get you on formula, we need to do expressing, we need to do this, we need to do that. And that's a lot for someone in those really early days anyway, when they're trying to figure out breastfeeding, particularly if they have had a C-section, for example, or they have had an instrumental birth or a traumatic birth. That's a lot to then put on top of their plate alongside breastfeeding. And we shouldn't be doing that unless it's absolutely necessary. So again, it might be a case of, if you end up having any fluids intravenously, to ask them to reweigh your baby at 24 hours. It may be that they don't accept that as a weight it may be that they go, well, we'll wait, but we won't write it anywhere. That's fine. But it might just be for you so that when they do that day 5 check, you can kind of be reassured. If they're panicking saying we need to do this feeding plan, but actually you look at that weight from 24 hours and you go, we're only on 6%. So I think we're fine. I'm just going to maybe keep that to myself and give it 24 hours or 48 hours, however long they want to come back, and just see what happens then, because it might be totally fine.
That's really good advice, and that's something I hadn't actually realized was a guideline because I had antibiotics for group B strep with my
Mm.
first birth, and I didn't realize that that was a thing that could be affected by
Yeah.
that. I mean, luckily Wilfred's weight, he didn't lose more than 10%, so it wasn't really a problem, but it very easily could have been, and I had no idea that that was a thing.
Yeah, it can very quickly derail things. And that just is like a prime example of how what happens in your birth can directly impact what is happening with feeding, because you get chucked on this feeding plan and that is really stressful and that's a lot for people to deal with. And like I said, we shouldn't be putting people on any sort of feeding plans or any babies on these feeding plans unless it is absolutely necessary, because it is a lot.
I think what this all boils down to is that in maternity and baby care, they just want every single person to fit like into this perfect box. Like they want everyone to tick all these things. And if you're somehow not on this like perfect tick list, then we need to fix it. Like you need to be on this list or you need fixing. And I just think individualized care is just so lacking.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? We don't get that personalized care anymore. It is just those tick boxes, and it really frustrates me. It makes me really angry. Whereas I much prefer that sort of personalized approach and looking at the bigger picture as well. Like talking about babies' weight, if they've lost a certain percentage of their weight, a lot of the health practitioners will, again, they'll go into panic. They'll go, okay, well, we need to put this baby on a feeding plan. Whereas I'm always like, hang on, let's look at this big picture here. You know, let's find out what's happening with the baby's nappies, wet and dirty nappies. Are they alert? Can we hear them sucking and swallowing? Can we actually see that baby is having an effective feed? Or is it that actually, yes, baby has lost 10% and also they're only having 2 wet nappies on day 5 and they haven't done a poo for the last 2 days? Okay, yes, there are a few red flags here, but it's completely different. I prefer to look at that bigger picture and actually focus on that family and that individual and that one baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, amazing. If only we could have people like you everywhere, like everywhere. That would be absolutely amazing. So yeah, I think that's the end of our conversation. I think we've covered everything that I wanted to talk about, and you've given us so much amazing information. If somebody did want to work with you, if they think, do you know what, this bee, she sounds like she knows what she's talking about. I want to work with her. How would somebody work with you and find you?
So I am mostly on Instagram. I'm Bees, Birth and Boobs. And I'm always happy for people to just message as well if they've got like questions. I try so hard not to charge people. I know this is terrible in terms of like trying to run a business, but because I have that passion to want to support people, I'm always, if people are like, oh, can I book you? I'm like, let's just have a quick conversation first. Just message me and we can just have a quick chat, because it might be a case of I'm able to signpost to various different resources, or I'm able to answer that question quite quickly without people having to pay. I'm like, I'd much rather give people my time for free as much as I possibly can than taking everybody's money. Like I said, it's not the best way to run a business, but that is, I run by passion rather than money. That's the way that I work. But I'm always welcome for people to just pop me a message anytime as well.
Love that. Love that. Thank you so much, B. Do you have any final kind of parting words? Any final thoughts?
I think the main thing is don't worry if the birth doesn't go to plan, if it's not that, textbook perfect birth. If it does end up in a C-section, it is very unlikely for that on its own to impact breastfeeding. And the main takeaway is whatever has happened, if you're having any problems at all, skin to skin and do it for hours and hours and hours. Literally, that is absolutely magic. Just getting skin to skin. for as long as you possibly can.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking to us today. And I have no doubt we'll probably talk again in the future.
Always happy to come back.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bell Mama Hypnobirthing and Positive Birth podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a review and hit subscribe on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an update. I'd love to hear from you, so if there's a topic you'd like me to cover, or a question you'd like answered, or if you'd like to share your birth story, please get in touch by email or DM me on Instagram. Until next time, take care.